Hello, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Anurekha Chari-Wagh, Assistant Professor, Department of Sociology, Savitribai Phule, Pune University. I coordinate the paper on Sociology of Gender. Today we are going to discuss the module Race, Black Feminism and Women of Color. This module starts with questioning the most important idea that why race is important for the issue of feminism, especially looking at both its theoretical developments and methodological challenges. Further, this module will also look into the concepts of feminism, race, black women and also women of color. Further, it will delve upon the emergence and growth of black feminism and also try to delineate the key thoughts of black feminism. At the end, it will end with a discussion on women of color movement. Race is a socially constructed category, though not completely. As a social construct, race can be defined as a group of people who share similar and distinct physical characteristics. In a society on the basis of race, which is constructed through cultural and social interactions, different groups assume the role of dominant and minority group. A group may be classified as a minority on the basis of ethnicity, race, sexual preference, age or class status. Thus, a minority group is not necessarily the minority in terms of numbers, but it is a group that holds low status in relation to other groups in a society. The group which enjoy power over minorities and hold important social, political, economic power is recognized as the dominant group. Race-based discrimination and oppression of people of minority group has existed in society. Here it is important to note that the minority group within itself is not homogeneous. Race often intersects with other sources of oppression like sex, sexuality, nationality, class, and so on, and influences the process. A gender analysis of racial discrimination recognizes that racial discrimination does not affect men and women equally or in the same way. Women belonging to a particular racial or ethnic group may face dual or multiple forms of discrimination based on race, gender, religion, nationality, social class, caste, age, and sexual orientation. But for the larger part of its history, movement against race and sexism did not give adequate space to the experiences of women who have to face double or multiple oppression because of their gender and racial identity. The discourse on racism gives primacy to race as a form of oppression, and the discourse of women's liberation sees gender as a common oppression faced by women. Both these movements ignored the intersectional and multiple oppressions faced by women across societies. In the later part of the 20th century, role of gender as a common form of oppression was challenged by the black feminists and the feminists from the Third World. Among them, the black movement within the United States and to a certain extent in other countries has made significant contribution. They started a debate which widened to other women of color groups. Incorporation of race in feminism, theoretical development. In recent times, feminism has been used to denote all kinds of movement and academic discourse demanding equality for women across all spheres. The development and growth of feminism can be divided into three waves. Initially, the term was linked to women's demand for suffrage in the United States and United Kingdom in the mid-19th and the early 20th century in what is now called the first wave feminism. The first wave was led by middle-class white women from US and UK who were focused mainly on political rights. Their idea was that all human beings are equal under the sun, thus none should be denied opportunity to compete on equal footing. This idea had its root in the liberal movement of the 19th century. The liberal argument was that a just society is one which allows individuals to exercise their autonomy and to fulfill themselves. To achieve their goal, feminists of this phase laid emphasis on getting political rights, which was seen as precursor to other demands like right to education, property, work, and so on. This was followed by the incorporation of demand for social and cultural rights for women along with political rights in the feminist movement. This phase, which lasted from mid-20th century to later half of the 20th century, is called the second wave feminism. The second wave widened the scope of feminism and critically looked at the differences between sex and gender. They adopted the concept of gender to define the social construction of masculinity and femininity. Differentiates between sex as a physical attribute that define people as male and female from the socio-cultural meaning assigned to them such as masculinity and femininity. It challenged the notion that biology is destiny. They were looking for formation of a movement with all women under the single banner to fight the common oppressor, that is the patriarchal system. Due to the set of demands, the feminists of this phase were considered radical feminists. Socialist feminists in this phase considered class and patriarchy as the reason for oppression of women. The leadership of women in this phase also remained enshrined within white middle-class heterosexual women. Last phase of the third wave feminism is a movement from 1980 onwards, which focused on the failure of the second wave and widened the set of demands, incorporating therein the idea of sexuality for others. Others included women from different race, ethnic, religious, and sexually oriented groups. In this phase, the concept of gender was challenged on the ground that it is insufficient to explain the experiences of large number of women from different socio-cultural contexts. The universal notion of the feminist movement was challenged as it left large number of women from its ambit. It had placed every woman under the same umbrella without giving due recognition to the differences. With advent of postmodernism and post-structuralism, it was argued that gender is not a stable category but a temporary, fluid and shifting. The meaning attached to gender were not universal, rather they were specific and were derived from particular social context. Every society and culture understands and represents gender identities in particular ways. It was described as socio-structural phenomenon which is produced, negotiated and sustained in everyday interaction with interception of other inequalities such as race, class, ethnicity and sexuality. For these scholars, sex is only one of the many distinctions that constructs gender, but rejected the notion of along with or alongside race, class, nationality, ethnicity or any other category. In contrast, gender is constructed through and by these distinctions. The ongoing debate among feminists about the root of women's oppression provided space for understanding the intersection of race and gender. Women from African and Asian origin living in Western countries, especially in United States and United Kingdom, have played an important role in sustaining this debate and making it more relevant. Emergence and growth of black feminism. Black feminism as a concept tries to understand the intersections of forms of oppression like race and gender. The premise of this is that the experience of black women cannot be understood simply as a woman or simply as black. The movement of black women has multiple roots and is embedded in historical context. The history of black feminism can be traced back to the 19th century abolition movement in the United States. Abolition movement was primarily launched against slavery. Many black women along with black men and white women stood against the exploitative status of slaves. Explaining the dual oppression of black women under slavery, Angela Davis points out that, but women suffered in different ways as well, for they were victims of sexual abuse and other barbarous mistreatment that could be only inflicted on women. Expediency governed the slaveholders' posture towards female slaves. When it was profitable to exploit them as if they were men, they were regarded in effect as genderless. But when they could be exploited, punished and repressed in ways suited only for women, they were locked into their exclusively female roles. Davis in her work further states that suffering of black women under slavery was equal to black men but less acknowledged and documented. Black women were considered socially equal within the slave community. They resisted and fought against the institution of slavery as vigorously as men on all fronts. During the time of slavery, there were black women activists like Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, Frances Harper, Ida Wells, Barnett, Mary Church Terrell, and many others who raised voice against both patriarchy and racism. Black women activists of the 19th century laid the foundation for the later black women's movement through the Colored Women's Club movement. All this was seen as a part of the larger women's movement, especially suffragette movement, and they were not able to maintain their unique identity. Thus, they created their thought process for the later black women's movement. Post 1970, the emergence of black feminism is seen as a response to the disappointment of black women who actively participated in the black liberation movement and women's movement. But they were marginalized and discriminated in both these movements. They were not given due space and outcome also left them disappointed. The objective of black liberation movements was liberation of black race as a whole, but freedom was equated with manhood. It was considered that racial discrimination is more harmful to black men than women. Attempts were also made to control black women's sexuality in order to form a unified black movement. Issues of women were forced on the back burner in order to keep a unified stance demanding equal rights for the black community. The women's rights movement also failed to take into account the issues of black women. The ongoing women's movement was similar to the earlier women's movement. White feminists of the period accepted the use of the word woman to refer only to the white woman. They did not challenge the racist, sexist tendency being attached to the term and rather supported its use. Capitalism was never denounced as a group by the white participants in the women's movement. They rather chose to define liberation in terms of white capitalist patriarchy and equated liberation with gaining economic status and money power. For them, work was the key to liberation. Thus, they refused to acknowledge the reality that for masses of American working class women, working for pay neither liberated them from sexist oppression nor allowed them to gain any measure of economic independence. Black women who participated in the feminist movement during 1960s often met with racism. It generally took the form of exclusion. Black women were not invited to participate on conference panels which were not specifically about black or third world women. They were not equally or even proportionally represented on the faculty of women's studies departments, nor there were classes devoted specifically to the study of black women's history. In most women's movement writing, the experiences of white middle class women were described as universal experiences, largely ignoring the differences of black and white women's experience due to race and class. In addition to this, well-known black women were often treated as tokens. Their work was accepted as representing black experience and were ever rarely criticized or challenged. The lack of space in the black liberation movement and women's movement forced black women to form their own movement. They felt the need of redefining and developing a framework to understand the oppression of women, which intersect with racism and sexism. The upheavals and disillusionment paved the way for formation of distinct black feminist movement. It was created to intersect the challenges of racism and sexism. The idea was to form groups and develop ideas and concepts to create framework for taking up the cause of black women as a unique entity. Key thoughts of the black feminism. Black feminists discarded simplistic and unified concepts of mainstream feminism. They developed a body of work which addresses the failure of existing feminist theories. The key ideas of black feminism put race and racism at the center of social relation as complicated by other social relation of domination. But it has become apparent that they cover other women also who were left out by the mainstream feminist. Challenging a single notion of womanhood. The first concept is this, and here the black feminists challenged and rejected the single notion of womanhood, which is rooted in the Western capitalist middle class heterosexual white identity of women. For instance, Sojourner Truth's powerful statement at the Women Convention in Akron, Ohio in 1851 was a 19th century deconstruction of the notion of a global common womanhood and an insistence on inserting black womanhood in a concept of what it meant to be a woman. She stated, "That man over there says that the woman needs to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or give me any best place. And ain't I a woman? Look at me, look at my arm. I have plowed and planted and am gathered into barns and no man could head me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as a man, when I could get it, and bear the lashes as well. Ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children and have seen most sold off to slavery, and when I cried out with my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman?" The speech of Sojourner Truth is important in many ways. It was one of the first reflection on black feminist thought, though was not theorized at this stage. But it generated a thought process and challenged the widely accepted notion of women and feminine qualities attached to them. Critique of mainstream theories and concepts. Many black feminist theorists and activists like Sojourner Truth, Barbara Christian, Gloria Joseph, Patricia Bell Scott, Barbara Smith, Gloria Hull, and many others from different disciplinary bases interrogated existing feminist theories and found them lacking, as they found them either incapable or ignorant towards black women's specific experiences and oppression. They have challenged a simplistic explanation and concepts and tools developed by mainstream feminists to explain women's oppression. In the process, black feminist theory destabilizes the coherence and certainty with which certain concepts and constructs are regarded in the general body of feminist thought. Black feminists see home differently. This place may have gender oppression, But as it is a place away from racial experience, it emerges as a source of strength. Davis states that contrary to the white feminist view of family's role in oppressing women, for the female slave, the family was meaningful and emotionally supportive. Later writings of women of color also agree that family also served as an emotional buffer in a race-biased society and created solidarity between men and women. Intersectionality. To understand the lived experiences and lives of black women, the idea of intersectionality was developed. The concept of intersectionality understood the intersections between various forms or systems of oppression. Black feminists like Spelman, Hooks, Crenshaw, Collins, and King have criticized the ways various forms of oppression has been understood. Deborah King rejected an additive approach to the woman's question. An additive approach is based on two key premises. First is dichotomous thinking. Dichotomous thinking organizes ideas, place, and person in terms of their oppression. That is black, white, thought, feeling, men and women. They are not seen as two different but interconnected ways. This approach classified every individual either as an oppressor or an oppressed. The other premise is that these dichotomous differences must be ranked: dominant, subordinate, men rule women, white rule black. In additive model of analysis, racism and classism can simply be added to sexism. Collins suggests that this incremental approach does not represent nature of black women's oppression, but rather leads to a non-productive assertions that only one factor can and should supplant the other. The modifier multiple refers not only to several simultaneous oppressions, but to multiplicative relationships among all of them. In other words, equivalent formulation is racism multiplied by sexism multiplied by classism. A black feminist ideology fundamentally challenges the interstructure of oppressions of racism, sexism, and classism both in dominant society and within movements for liberation. It is in confrontation with multiple jeopardy that black women define and sustain multiple consciousness essential for our liberation, of which feminist consciousness is an integral part. Thus, intersectionality was seen as a more reflective way of understanding black women or women of color. Intersectionality as a concept was theorized by black feminist and legal scholars Crenshaw. Crenshaw, in her work Demarginalizing the Intersection of Race and Sex, a black feminist critique of anti-discrimination doctrine, used the concept of intersectionality to denote the various ways in which race and gender interact to shape multiple dimensions of women's experience in employment. Collins further used the concept of intersectionality to analyze how oppressions such as race and gender or sexuality and nation work together in producing injustice. She used the term actors of domination in this regard. In her book Black Feminist Thought, she distinguished between both terms in examining how oppression affects black women. She states that intersectionality refers to particular forms of intersecting operations, for example, intersections of race and gender or of sexuality and nation. Intersectional paradigms remind us that oppression cannot be reduced to one fundamental type and that oppressions work together in producing injustice. In contrast, the matrix of domination refers to how these intersecting operations are actually organized. Regardless of the particular intersections involved, structural, disciplinary, hegemonic and interpersonal domains of power reappear across quite different forms of oppression. Ideas of intersectionality and the matrix of domination challenge the many of our political assumptions. Black feminist epistemology, for example, challenges assumptions concerning the separation of the private and the public sphere. It also challenges the assumption that gender stratification affects all women in the same way race and class matter as does sexual identity. Intersectionality motivates us to look at just how identities are constructed at the expense of others. Black women's standpoint. Collins argues that black women occupy a unique standpoint on their own oppression composed of two interlocking components. Black women's political and economic status provides them with a distinctive set of experiences that offers a different view of material reality that available to other groups. These experiences stimulate a distinctive black feminist consciousness concerning material reality. Collins' view follows a general standpoint logic of arguing that subordinate group not only experiences a different reality than a group that rules, but a subordinate group may interpret that reality differently than a dominant group. This emphasizes the connection between what one does and how one thinks. Black feminist thought reformulates and re-articulates a distinctive, self-defined standpoint of African American women. Kimberly Crenshaw agrees with this and states that black women sometimes experience discrimination in ways similar to white women's experience, and sometimes they share very similar experiences with black men. Yet often they experience double discrimination, the combined effects of practices which discriminate on the basis of race and on the basis of sex. And sometimes they experience discrimination as a black woman, not the sum of race and sex discrimination, but as black women. View on political economy. Black feminists adopted political economic structure of socialism for analysis. In the Combahee River collective statement, black feminists have made their view about capitalism and Marxism. They state, "We realize that the liberation of all oppressed people necessitates the destruction of the political economic systems of capitalism and imperialism as well as patriarchy. We are socialists because we believe that work must be organized for the collective benefit of those who do the work and create the products, and not for the profit of the bosses. Material resources must be equally distributed among those who create these resources." Towards a women of color movement. Movement of women of color, that is from Asia, Africa, Latin America, is largely seen as a part of the black feminist movement and based on the model provided by them. The movement against racism and sexism initiated by black feminists provide a useful framework to understand the issue of other minority women. It inspired and motivated them to understand their own oppression. It insisted other women of color to form a strong movement against racism and sexism. Women from different racial groups initially joined the black feminism and became the part of the ongoing movement against racism and sexism. Later on, they have developed their own distinct feminism. Sonia Shah, South Asian American feminist, states that in many ways, white feminism, with its personal and political maxim and its emphasis on building sisterhood and consciousness raising, had brought us together. Black feminism, on the other hand, has taught us that we could expect more, that feminism can incorporate a race analysis. Yet both movements spurred us to organize. Neither included a South Asian American agendas towards battery of immigrant women, ghettoization of the Indian community, cultural discrimination, bicultural history and identity. The discussions were expanded to include the impact of colonialism and imperialism on the third world women. Arguments have been made linking racism with colonialism and its impact on women. Chandra Talpade Mahanti raised the awareness of the impact of Western scholarship on third world women in a context of world system dominated by the West. In her analysis of the representations of the third world women in the 9 texts in the Z Press, Women in the Third World series, Mohanty finds that almost in all these texts, women are monolithically represented as victims of an unchanging patriarchy. These representations uproot women from the lived situations and the practices that shape and are shaped by them. Crucial point that is forgotten is that women are produced through these very relations as well as being implicated in forming these relations. Feminist scholars and activists from Third World initiated a movement to recognize the struggles of the colonial past, which also had an impact on the identity formation of women from the Third World. They argued that discourse on women and race should not be centered on Europe, North America, Australia, and New Zealand, or in terms of black versus white. It should incorporate anti-colonial struggle and struggle of women of color in the Third World, which are critical for understanding how gender subordinate is both reproduced and challenged everywhere. Contribution and criticism. Like any movement of the marginalized group, the black women and the women of color feminists have been criticized for creating hindrance to larger goal and objectives of feminist movement, that is equality of women across spectrum and liberation from all kind of oppressions. Mainstream feminists saw them as a group which was making specific demands and creating gap between whites and the blacks within the movement. This criticism has failed to get acceptance as black scholars were largely ignored throughout the feminist movement till 1970s. Black feminists have tried to portray that they represent the oppression of all women of color. Their ideas reflect the aspirations of other women of color also. But the scholars and movement has largely ignored others like Asian, South American and the Third World women. Movement of the other women have gained from the experiences of black feminist movement, but have been critical to them to the extent for confining the debate to black versus white while ignoring them. The black feminist movement have gathered in strength and begun to work on specific issues like reproductive rights, sterilization, abuse, equal access to abortion, healthcare, childcare, right of the disabled, violence against women, rape, battering, sexual harassment, welfare rights, lesbian and gay rights, aging, police brutality, and many others. Black feminist movement toiled hard to fulfill its objectives, however it had to face several challenges. Most importantly, the movement must find a way to broaden support among black and third world women. The aims and objectives of the movement must reach to all. There is a need for the development of a mentor relationship between black women, scholar, activists, and young black students, both female and male. Individual struggle must be connected with a larger feminist movement to effect change, so that new black feminists need not invent theory or search again for history that was never recorded. In this module on race, black feminism and women of color, we discussed various issues such as the whole idea of black feminist movement, women of color. It raised an important issue that racism is just not an issue of African Americans, the same way feminism is not a woman's issue. Further, the whole discourse on race, black feminism, and also women of color showed how feminism is very closely to be understood within the whole intersectionality framework. Further, the black feminist movement has also inspired and supported the third world women's movement. So their interlinkages must be understood. Further, the differences between all these movements must be respected, acknowledged, but also using that respect and acknowledgement of the differences, broad alliances must also be built if we want to question the whole idea of women's oppression around the world.